7-1 before the off. Rider Philip Byrnes for the Charles Byrnes stable came off unseated. Of course, on social media there's been a lot of chat about what we can and can't say. People want us to be more vehement in our condemnation of what we saw. Of course, there are broadcasting rules that we all have to abide by in those circumstances, and of course there's also the legal ramifications of saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. And when it comes to libel and slander, the only defence, the best defence of that is by proving the truth, and it's very hard to prove anything. But of course, when we look back at that race, I can totally understand why people have suspicions about what's gone on, because I've mentioned the circumstances of it. Now, Redwood Queen has come down to the last under Philip Byrnes. Seemingly jumps it okay. In fact, jumps it really well, some would say, and has been pointed out. He knows the filly. Philip Byrnes knows Redwood Queen really well. He's ridden her many times before, and he comes off, I think it's fair to say, by unseat very easily. We've got a couple of different angles to look at it. This is the head-on. I talked about it on Wednesday night. There's been a lot of talk about it subsequently. And that, by all accounts, is a very soft unseat. We've seen horses unseat countless times. We're all regular race watchers, and we all know that watching something like that, it looks very strange, to say the least. There are certain things that we can say, certain things we can't say. At its worst, it could be something sinister. And if you say at its best, it's a relative level of incompetence. But this is what we're watching, a third angle, as Philip Byrnes goes down on Redwood Queen to the last. So within the context of everything that is said around it, broadcasters have to be very careful about what we say for various reasons. So that's just a summary of one of what will be in this week's talking points. And right at the top of that list is the unseat of Redwood Queen at Wexford. Adam and Emma alongside me. Adam, I will start with you. Your view on what you saw.
Yeah, look, obviously I'm going to be pro-jockey by nature, and perhaps it's a bit of naivety for me as well, but I want to think it was an unseat. I understand how it looks, but the logical part of my brain says, if it was something sinister, why would you wait till the last to do it? Why wouldn't you do it somewhere else? And it looks really bad. I think it's a really bad bit of riding. And I think the jockey would put his hands up and say, I should never have fallen off that. But also, I've ridden in races. You've seen other jockeys riding races. I've ridden out at home. I've fallen off when I shouldn't have. I've had silly unseats at home riding out on the gallops. Other jockeys in school and sessions have silly falls. You see jockeys having silly falls every day. It happens. That being said, it doesn't look good. That part of my brain wants to say it wasn't anything sinister.
Emma?
It's extremely hard to say exactly what occurred, but I think my view of the incident is that it's very unfortunate that the stewards on race day didn't immediately refer it for a proper review, proper investigation into the betting patterns to see if there is a more sinister link to what went on. And I know there is now a review taking place, but that's a little bit, after the show. I think that in itself made it look worse. The incident doesn't look good. It's not for me to say whether it was intentional or not, but I just think it's a shame it wasn't handled a little bit better on the day.
I look back at an incident like that and I'm saying, if we had a panel of former riders observing incidents like this for referral. So it's very hard, as we know. We've seen cases like this before where there are suspicious betting patterns and they're very soft unseats or strange occurrences, which nothing comes of it because it's very difficult to prove. It's happened time and time again. But a lot of us are punters. We watch races a lot of the time and we're thinking that looks very weird. Okay? If there was a panel of former riders watching over incidents like this, to say, okay, so as I said earlier, at its worst, it's something sinister and it needs a lot more scrutiny and investigation. at its best, it's a level of incompetence. Should a panel decide whether something like that for a rider doing something as falling off in that manner, and that they ought to actually perhaps have time off from the sport to go back and freshen up, and, you know, improve their skills, because that sort of skill or that level that he's produced on that horse, ultimately people are putting their money on that horse. They want someone operating at their absolute best, and that wasn't the best of Philip Byrnes. You said it. Everyone agrees. You say Philip Byrnes would say it as well. So should someone be saying in that situation, OK, well, it may not be sinister, but if that's what's happened, then maybe you ought to be going back to jockey school and being harsh.
I appreciate the logic, I think, but if we want to follow that logic through sport, then if Paul Townend does it, does he have to go back to jockey school? If Harry Kane misses a penalty, does he go back to football school? I think it's professional sport and mistakes happen. It didn't look good. If it was incompetence and it was really, really poor riding, it was very poor. And I think most jockeys would say, I'm not really sure how you fell off that, it wasn't good. But to say he needs to go back to jockey school, I think is a little bit of a stretch. I think if he does it multiple times, then yeah.
OK. I mean, my point being that if we can't prove it because of betting patterns and trying to link whether there was something sinister, if we can't prove that, there has to be some sort of deterrent to stop people in those sort of situations, or not deterrent, but punishment maybe for that level of disappointment or poor riding. Or maybe I think
you're getting on really tricky ground then, because what is poor riding? I mean, that's an obvious example, but then if you go through...
Well, that's why I would put together a professional panel who understood it more than I did.
Yeah, but even a professional panel of jockeys, looking back at other jockeys riding, they're going to be the harshest critics. So I think it's really tricky ground, yeah.
OK. All right. I'm thinking. It's about trying to find some better way of trying to maybe manage situations like this in the future. OK, speaking of managing situations in the future, it's not going to be, for the BHA, a situation in racing managed by Lord Allen, Emma, because it appears that he is holding off his appointment, or for whatever reason it's being held, but it appears to be governance at the heart of why he's not taking up his position as the BHA chair. What does this say about the sport? What does it say about the way the sport is being run?
It says we're in big trouble at the moment in that we don't have a chair, we don't have a chief executive of the BHA, and that is not a good look for a professional sport of our magnitude. It's extremely concerning that he's taken this decision. When I first read it, I thought, well, why can't he just take up the role and continue the discussions with the relevant people then, which I would have assumed he'd be doing anyway. Clearly, he has some grave concerns as to whether or not he can even take up that position if he's not going to be able to impose a new structure that he thinks could work for the sport. So it has to be really concerning. We have no idea whether he's actually going to take up this position at some, unspecified point in the future. It's an extraordinary story, and it's not a great look for the BHA or for British racing.
Adam, when you came on the show earlier, you spoke about governance being a major issue for all bodies, whether it's the PJA or not. But the issue of governance for racing, we thought had been partially rectified, was it 3 years ago? They altered the governance structure. It continues to hold the sport back. And if it continues to hold the sport back for so long, why aren't we doing something about it?
Well, I think the difficulty is it's incumbent now on the stakeholders and participants to recognise the sport's in decline, and we have to be mature enough to be selfless to say, I'm going to have to sacrifice something here for the good of the sport. That's a little bit easier for me to say from a jockey's perspective, because they probably don't have quite as much to sacrifice as other stakeholders. But the reality is, it's not going as well as it should be. In order for that to change, we need to change as a sport. I don't think an incoming chair or a chief exec can do that on their own. I think the participants need to be mature enough to be selfless, yeah.
Selfless, self-sacrifice continues to be the bane, I think, of the management and governance of this sport. Let's talk about something that's slightly sad, that he's come to a career end. That's Kyprios, but what a horse he has been. It has been a privilege and a pleasure to watch him, Emma, over the last few years. He's been wonderful.
He really has been, especially when you consider what he went through. I mean, I think he was quite close to dying. So to come back from that, you know, you could have understood if he'd come back and not been quite himself, but he's just got better and better. A terrific training performance to keep a horse like that sweet and sound through so many seasons. I had a little bit of a grudge against him when he really burst on the Group 1 seat, because I felt he'd stolen Stradivarius's crown, but it was time for the new stayer to come through, and what a champion he's been.
I imagine any jockey would have loved to have ridden him, because he was so genuine and willing to dig as deep as you wanted in the closing stages.
Yeah, absolute legend, and he made Ryan's job probably easier than it might have been. That's not to say that Ryan didn't give him great rides, because he obviously did. He's Ryan, but yeah, to watch the two of them in motion, it's the type of thing that makes you fall in love with racing, isn't it? To see him go through his career the way he did, it just makes you realise what we're all in it for, I think.
Yeah, and the qualities he brings, Emma, are the sort of qualities we're talking about when we're talking about Kitasan Black and where he's going to go at stud. It appears the future will probably be as a national hunt sire, right?
I would imagine so. They haven't announced any stud plans for him yet, and he's co-owned by his co-breeder, Morglare Stud, and so they'll be having discussions with Coolmore as to where Kyprios ends up. But yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see. And you know, he's so important for the sport. Those type of horses are just for the public to latch on to see those horses coming back year after year and to really engage with them.
It's interesting when you hear Aiden OBrien talking over the years about Sadler's Wells and then Galileo and their attitude. You know, he kept saying they'd go through brick walls for you. You'd heard him say that. Kyprios was the embodiment of that. You know, in a sense, he had that career, possibly career-ending injury, which he came back from, and in his races he would portray that type of attitude. That's surely something breeders should find attractive at all levels. Very much so, and I don't think it can be overstated how important temperament is in a horse. You know, we all look at breeding, we all look at race performance, but temperament, I think, is something all breeders should be considering when they're sorting out their mating plans. I'm sure they do, yeah. But it's you know, it's the thing you can't see. You can judge conformation, you can look at a pedigree on a page, but what's in a horse's mind, what's in their heart is the unknowable until they're actually racing, yeah. And that's so important. The temperament of jockeys tested by facilities. Redcar, obviously in the news. Tom Marquand making the point about the unacceptable facilities at Redcar recently. The positioning of the exercise bike. There's the washing machine. There was an open gutter, I think he said as well. It is very small at Redcar. Perhaps you can add a bit more information to this, Adam. Yeah, it's just really disappointing. I think anybody watching that will recognise that's just not right, especially for professional athletes. And obviously Tom's been around the world and he's seen the facilities elsewhere, and he has to come home to that. It concerns me, are we going to lose our top athletes if this is what they have to keep dealing with? And there's been points made about the location of the bike, who moved the bike. I think the difficulty is wherever you are in that Redcar weighing room, there's not space for the bike. I appreciate certain racecourses have different challenges. And Redcar's not the only racecourse that has challenges. Yes. Yeah, of course. There's plenty of them have challenges, and we've been dealing with this weighing room project for 4 years now. 2 years since I've been in the role of the PGA. It's incredibly frustrating. It's incredibly disappointing. But I think common sense has to prevail. That's not good enough, and we need to be better as a sport. Emma, you've been lucky to travel the world with the sport. When you see the facilities, or you see jockeys complaining of the facilities that they have to endure here, what does that make you feel about when you visit other jurisdictions? Well, obviously I don't go into many weighing rooms, but quite clearly we have to up our game. You know, we can't call ourselves a world-class racing nation and have poor facilities, even at the smaller tracks. We've talked about jockeys' mental health. You know, you're out riding throughout the afternoon, you need that sanctity to come back into whatever you need to do, whether it's exercise bikes. I know there are no saunas anymore, but there needs to be some respite, and you don't need to be coming back in perhaps after you've ridden a bad race and sitting there thinking, well, this is, what am I doing in here? Everything needs to be in their favour as top-class sportsmen and women. a person who was at the top of the sport a while back was Greg Fairley, Group 1 winning jockey for the Mark Johnston team way back when. He was warned off in 2011 for his involvement in race fixing. He came back in the ban ended in 2023, and he's coming back to the sport now in 2025. Is it simply a case of he did the crime, he served his time, and we welcome him back? Or could you understand if people are a little bit wary to welcome him back, Adam?
Well, I think, of course, people are going to be wary, and rightfully so. But I think, again, as a sport, we have to ask ourselves, has he served his time? We're wary, and rightfully, but there's going to be conditions on his licence as well. It's not a case of, here's your licence back, you can go do what you want, and we won't monitor. He's went through a rigorous process. He sat in front of a panel. I didn't have any direct dealings with Greg, and I haven't spoken to him personally, but from reading the judicial panel report, it strikes me that he was very honest when he could have not been so honest. Mm-hmm. He seems more mature, obviously, than he was back then. I think, of course, there will be conditions on his licence, and he should be monitored, and he will be, but I do think 12 years is a long time. And if we get to a point where we give someone a sentence and then they come back and they do everything right and they follow the correct process and we don't relicense them, then what's the point in the sentence? Just warn someone off for life. And I don't think that's fair. I think everyone deserves a second chance.
It was a long time ago that this happened, Emma. 16 years ago, the incident happened. Like so many of us, you change a lot in that period of time. So are you willing to accept Greg Fairley back in with relative open arms?
Absolutely. I mean, as you say, he was, 21 when this happened. Of course, if you're a licensed individual, you have responsibilities to that licence and to the sport. But he has served his time. I agree completely with Adam's views on that. He's not going to be so stupid as to come back in and do something similar, because he will be scrutinised very closely and he'll be fighting hard for every ride that he's given. I was surprised to read that he wanted to return, but clearly he feels he has unfinished business with the sport and with being a jockey. Good luck to him, and I think we have to accept that he has served what is a long penalty and deserves a second chance.
Aiden OBrien has got the Lion in Winter. Committed to the Derby, apparently. I think yesterday, I'm sure he told Matt Chapman that that's still the plan. But the question mark about the Lion in Winter, the market moves. 1 minute he's favourite, 1 minute he's on the drift out to double figures. Just based on what you saw in the Dante, do you feel the Lion in Winter is a live Derby contender?
No, purely on the first couple of furlongs. How difficult, how often do we see Ryan in that position, in that sort of level of discomfort that he was in, trying to rein him back? It's quite infrequent. That would suggest to me he was unmanageable. Take that to Epsom with the fanfare, the crowd, the undulations, the track. It doesn't fill me with a lot of confidence. The other side of the coin is he's Aiden OBrien's. You can't write him off. You just can't. But I'd be keeping my fiver in my pocket.
Auguste Rodin, City of Troy, blew out in the Guineas. They came back, admittedly longer between races to the Derby. But the variations, the fluctuations in the market this week make it really difficult for punters, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. You couldn't really back him with any confidence. And yes, always you have to factor in Aiden OBrien, but at the same time, for me, he's coming into the race, if indeed he is declared for the Derby, with a very different profile to Auguste Rodin and City of Troy. For me, he hasn't done enough, and he was very relaxed in the parade ring at York. He was a little bit recalcitrant at the start, and as Adam has said, tricky enough in the race. He doesn't fill me with confidence as a Derby contender at this stage.
Who would you ride out of the O'Brien contenders?
Delacroix, obviously.
Simple. Yeah,
simple, I think. Yeah, he was impressive enough in Ireland. Seems the most straightforward, most likely to handle the track, most likely to stay. Yeah.
OK. Well, I might ask you who you might ride in the Derby full stop. Would it be Delacroix, or would you ride...
I'd go Pride of Arras, yeah.
Pride of Arras, yeah, the Dante winner, yeah.
Yeah, he looked really impressive to me. I love the way he went through the race, considering it was only his second start, the way he put it to bed. He's got that flashy bit of something about him that I really like. Whether he handles Epsom's another question, but yeah, if I could pick one, I think he'd be the one.
He was very good. at York. Last subject on this week's Talking Points, Emma, and the Flat Pattern Committee under a little bit of fire for changes to the Windsor Castle. But just to very quickly tell you, from 2026, the Windsor Castle is going up to 6 furlongs, and sires must have sired a winner over 7 furlongs plus at 2, or a mile plus at 3 or older. Is that right? Are we doing the right thing?
The stallion must have won at 7 furlongs.
Yes, sorry, yes, the stallion must have won.
Or a mile older. Look, it's an attempt to try to try to stop the skewing away from middle distance horses to the speedier type of stallion. That's not to say we don't want sprint stallions at stud. Of course we do. The important thing about the pattern, as you know very well, is to have balance. I worry about the focus on having a Royal Ascot 2-year-old. Of course, everyone wants a Royal Ascot winner. There's got to be something beyond June of a horse's 2-year-old career, though, for those that don't make it into that sort of, first 3 or 4 home in those races. And we have 6 2-year-old races at Ascot, 4 of which are open with no conditions. The Chesham obviously has its own conditions as well. That's more graded towards the staying type of horse for the future as well. I would an even more unpopular view than the clearly unpopular news from the British Flat Pattern Committee. I would question whether we even need 6 2-year-old races at Ascot. Do we even need the Windsor Castle? But I mean, probably Nick Smith will be on the phone to me pretty quickly, and various other stallion managers as soon as I get out of here. But do we? I mean, there are, plenty of opportunities for those horses at Ascot and beyond. I think we need to think very carefully about the focus we're putting on the juveniles at that time of year.
Well, you know as well as I do, both of you, that when the sales time come, the breeze-ups, people are always talking about this is an Ascot 2-year-old, this is an Ascot 2-year-old, this will make an Ascot 2-year-old. Even when horses go into training, the trainers' report sometimes come back and you'll hear them say, this might be Ascot, this might be an Ascot horse. So that effort to drive them towards that meeting remains something that we will certainly be talking about over the next months or so.
But you can have an Ascot 3-year-old and 4-year-old, or a Trawlerman 7-year-old. There's more to life than just juvenile winners.
Fair point. Adam and Emma, thank you very much. That has been this week's Talking Points. Well, that has been this week's Talking Points, and it is also time for us to say goodbye to Adam. Adam, thank you very much for joining us. Have you enjoyed this little stint? Hope that it's been okay.